I never thought I'd come home to find my life split wide open like a cracked egg on concrete. But there I was, standing in my own doorway at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, staring at a woman I'd never seen before, sitting calmly at our dining table like she owned the place. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Henry Dalton, and I manage commercial real estate leases for small businesses in what used to be a decent part of New England before the economy decided to take a long nap. I'm 46, drive a Honda with 200,000 miles on it, and until that night, I thought my biggest problem was convincing landlords to accept tenants who couldn't afford first, last, and security deposits. The woman at my table had short auburn hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she'd seen enough of the world's nonsense to fill a library. She wore a navy blazer that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and her hands were folded neatly in front of her like she was waiting for a business meeting to begin. "Who is she?" Paula's voice cracked across the room like a whip. My wife stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her pharmaceutical company blazer, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe bun she favored for important meetings. "Henry, who is this woman? Are you sleeping with her?" I stayed silent. After 16 years of marriage, I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Let the moment breathe, let the tension build, let other people fill the silence with their own guilt. The stranger smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind of expression a chess player might wear after moving their queen into position. "I'm Marina Cross," she said, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms. "Evan's wife." Paula went white, not pale, white. The color drained from her face so completely that for a moment I thought she might collapse right there on our hardwood floor. "I don't know what you think you know," Paula stammered, "but whatever Evan told you—" Marina held up a phone, just held it up, screen facing Paula without saying a word. From where I stood, I couldn't see what was on that screen, but I watched my wife's face crumble like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Her hands started shaking. "It's not what it looks like," Paula screamed, the words tearing out of her throat with raw desperation. "I can explain. Henry, please, let me explain." That's when I finally spoke. Just 4 words, delivered in the same tone I might use to tell someone the weather forecast. "The conversation is finished." Paula stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "What do you mean, finished?" "Henry, you have to listen to me. This is our marriage." I walked to the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip, set the glass down with deliberate care. "Marina and I have been talking for 3 weeks, I said. "We've exchanged evidence. I've spoken to my lawyer. I've contacted your HR department about their policy on workplace relationships between supervisors and subordinates." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner. "You what?" Paula's voice was barely a whisper. Marina stood up from the table, smoothing her blazer. "PharmaCorp takes a very dim view of executives who falsify expense reports to fund personal relationships," she said conversationally, "especially when those relationships involve conflicts of interest in vendor selection." Paula's legs gave out. She grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. "You can't do this. You don't understand. Evan and I, we were just—" "Stealing from your company?" I suggested, "because that's what the receipts show. Hotel rooms charged to the marketing budget for client meetings that never happened, restaurant bills for 2 when you claimed to be dining alone with prospects." I'd been gathering evidence for months. Every late night Paula claimed to be working. Every weekend conference that somehow never appeared on PharmaCorp's official calendar. Every time she came home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people don't bother to cover their tracks around you. Paula saw me as her boring, predictable husband who managed strip mall leases and watched baseball on weekends. She never imagined I might have the patience and attention to detail of someone who'd spent 20 years reviewing contracts and catching the lies people tell themselves about money. "I've already moved our joint savings to an account in my name only," I continued. The house is in both our names, but I've documented every dollar of my contributions to the down payment and mortgage. Your lawyer will explain how adultery affects asset division in this state." Paula was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. "Henry, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." Marina picked up her purse and headed for the door. "Good luck," she said to me. To Paula, she said nothing at all. After she left, Paula tried everything. Tears, anger, bargaining, more tears. She swore it meant nothing. She promised to end it immediately. She accused me of being cold and calculating, as if those were bad things under the circumstances. I listened to it all with the same expression I wore when reviewing lease applications I knew I'd have to reject. When she finally ran out of words, I said, "I'll be staying at the Hampton Inn until you find somewhere else to live. The locks will be changed tomorrow." "You can't throw me out of my own house. Watch me." That was 3 months ago. The divorce was finalized last week. Paula lost her job 2 weeks after that, when PharmaCorp's internal investigation confirmed what Marina and I had already documented. Evan got demoted and transferred to their Phoenix office, where he's probably explaining to his new colleagues why his wife left him and took half his assets. But that's not the end of the story. That's just where it gets interesting. The problem with small cities is that everyone knows everyone else's business, and they all have opinions about it. Within a week of Paula moving out, half the town had heard some version of what happened. The other half heard a completely different version, usually involving me as the villain who'd somehow driven my poor wife into another man's arms. That's where our so-called friends came in. Jake Morrison and I had been buddies since college. We'd been groomsmen at each other's weddings, spent countless Sunday afternoons watching football and complaining about our jobs, and I genuinely thought he was someone I could count on. His wife Lisa had been Paula's closest friend for over a decade. The first sign of trouble came when Jake stopped returning my calls. The second was when I ran into him at Murphy's bar, and he acted like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Hey, stranger," I said, sliding onto the bar stool next to him. "Haven't seen you around lately." Jake stared into his beer like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Been busy." "Too busy to return a phone call?" He finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Disgust. "Lisa's been talking to Paula," he said. "She told us what really happened." I signaled the bartender for a beer. "What really happened is that my wife was stealing from her company to fund an affair with her boss, but I'm curious to hear Paula's version. She said you hired a private investigator to stalk her, that you conspired with some crazy woman to destroy her career out of spite." The beer arrived, and I took a long pull before responding. Marina Cross isn't crazy. She's Evan's wife, and I didn't hire anyone to stalk Paula. I just started paying attention to where my money was going. "You ruined her life over a few hotel bills?" "I ruined her life?" I set my beer down harder than necessary. "Jake, she was embezzling from her employer. She was lying to me every single day for over a year. She was planning to leave me anyway. I just made sure she didn't take everything I'd worked for when she did." Jake stood up and threw a 20 on the bar. "You used to be a decent guy, Henry. I don't know what happened to you." He walked out without another word, leaving me alone with my beer and the uncomfortable stares of the other patrons who'd overheard our conversation. That scene repeated itself with variations over the next few weeks. Tom Bradley, who'd been my poker buddy for 8 years, suddenly couldn't find time for our weekly game. Steve Walsh, my former neighbor, crossed the street when he saw me coming. Even my barber started acting weird, cutting my hair in uncomfortable silence instead of our usual friendly chatter. The story they'd heard painted me as a vindictive husband who'd destroyed an innocent woman's life out of jealousy. Paula had always been good with narratives. It's what made her successful in marketing, and she'd crafted one that cast her as the victim of a cold, calculating man who couldn't forgive a simple mistake. The fact that her simple mistake involved fraud, adultery, and a year of systematic lies somehow got lost in the retelling. Lisa Morrison was the worst of them. She'd apparently appointed herself Paula's champion and was spreading her version of events to anyone who'd listen. According to Lisa, I was a controlling husband who'd driven Paula into Evan's arms through years of emotional neglect, then orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme when she finally found happiness. The irony was that I'd never been happier in my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wondering where my wife really was or why she seemed to find everything about our life together so disappointing. I wasn't checking credit card statements with growing dread or lying awake at night wondering if I was losing my mind. But happiness, I was learning, doesn't make you popular. People prefer their victims miserable and their villains obviously evil. I was neither, which made everyone uncomfortable. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in October. I was having lunch at Rossetti's, a little Italian place downtown, when Jake, Lisa, Tom, and Steve walked in together. They saw me immediately. I was sitting alone at a table by the window, working my way through a plate of lasagna and reading a book about commercial real estate law. They could have chosen any of the dozen empty tables in the restaurant. Instead, they chose the one directly behind me and started talking loud enough to ensure I'd hear every word. "I heard Paula's living in a studio apartment now," Lisa said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "She can barely afford groceries." "It's criminal what he did to her," Tom replied. "Going after her job like that. What kind of man destroys his wife's career?" The kind who never deserved her in the first place, Steve added. Paula always was too good for him. I kept reading, but the words on the page might as well have been hieroglyphics. My hands were steady, but there was a cold fury building in my chest that I recognized from the night I'd found Marina sitting at my dining table. "He's sitting right there," Jake said, lowering his voice just enough to create the illusion of discretion, probably listening to every word. "Good," Lisa snapped. "Maybe he'll finally feel some shame for what he's done." I closed my book, left $30 on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. But as I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. "Henry, wait up." I turned to find Jake jogging across the parking lot, his face flushed with either exertion or embarrassment. "Look," he said, "maybe we got a little carried away in there." "Maybe?" "Lisa's just upset about Paula. You know how women are when their friends are hurting." I studied his face, looking for some trace of the man who'd been my friend for over 20 years. "Jake, let me ask you something. If you found out Lisa was stealing money from her company to pay for hotel rooms where she was screwing her boss, what would you do?" "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened. I have the receipts, I have the bank records, I have text messages where Paula and Evan laugh about how easy it is to fool their respective spouses." Jake's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Even if that's true?" "It is true. Even if it is, you didn't have to destroy her. You could have just divorced her quietly." "Quietly?" I felt that cold fury spreading through my chest like spilled ice water. "Jake, she wasn't planning to divorce me quietly. She was planning to take half of everything I own while continuing to steal from her company and lie to everyone who knew us. The only difference is that I found out first." "You're not the same person you used to be." "You're right," I said. "I used to be someone who let people walk all over him. Someone who trusted too much and paid attention too little. Someone who cared more about being liked than being respected." I got in my car and rolled down the window. "But here's what I learned, Jake. When people show you who they really are, believe them. Paula showed me she was a liar and a thief, and you just showed me you're the kind of friend who disappears the moment things get complicated." I drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot with his mouth hanging open. 3 weeks later, they ambushed me. I was leaving Murphy's bar after watching the Patriots game when I found all 4 of them waiting by my car. Jake, Lisa, Tom, and Steve, arranged in a semicircle like they were planning an intervention. "We need to talk," Lisa announced. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the kind of aggressive personality that made her seem larger. "This has gone on long enough." "What's gone on long enough?" I asked, fishing my keys out of my pocket. "Your campaign against Paula," Tom said. "We know you're still spreading stories about her around town." I stopped walking. "What stories?" "Don't play dumb," Steve added. "Everyone knows you're the reason she can't find work. You're poisoning every potential employer against her." That was interesting. I hadn't spoken to anyone about Paula in weeks, but apparently my reputation had grown in the telling. According to them, I was some kind of mastermind orchestrating a citywide conspiracy to keep my ex-wife unemployed. "Paula can't find work because she was fired for embezzlement," I said. "That tends to make employers nervous." "She was never charged with embezzlement," Jake protested, "because PharmaCorp didn't want the publicity. But they fired her for cause, which means she can't collect unemployment and they won't give her a reference. That's not my fault. That's the natural consequence of stealing from your employer." Lisa stepped closer, her face twisted with anger. "You destroyed a good woman's life because your ego couldn't handle being left for a better man." That's when something inside me snapped. Not violently. I'm not the type to throw punches or break things. But something cold and calculating clicked into place like a lock turning in a door I hadn't known existed. "A better man?" I repeated, my voice perfectly calm. "Lisa, do you know what Evan Cross is doing right now?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "He's in Phoenix, working in a cubicle instead of a corner office, making about 60% of what he used to make. His wife took half his assets in their divorce, including the house he'd been paying for since before Paula was even born. He's living in a 1-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old Toyota because his credit is shot." I looked around the circle of faces, seeing doubt creep into their expressions for the first time. "But here's the really interesting part," I continued. "Paula thinks he's going to send for her once he gets settled. She thinks they're going to start over together in Arizona, like some kind of romantic movie. She doesn't know that he's already dating his new secretary, or that he's told everyone in Phoenix that his ex-wife was a crazy stalker who cost him his marriage." "You're lying," Lisa whispered. "Am I? Call him. His number's still the same. Ask him about his plans for Paula." The silence stretched out like a wire being pulled tight. You want to know what really happened? I asked. Paula didn't leave me for a better man. She left me for a man she thought was better, but who turned out to be exactly what he appeared to be, a middle-aged coward who was willing to risk other people's money and marriages for a few months of excitement. I unlocked my car and opened the door. And you four, I said, looking at each of them in turn. You didn't lose a friend when Paula and I divorced. You revealed that you were never really my friends in the first place. Real friends ask questions before they choose sides. Real friends care about the truth more than they care about drama. Henry, wait, Jake started, but I held up a hand. I'm not angry with you, I said. I'm grateful. You've saved me years of wondering who I could really count on. Now I know. I got in my car and drove home, leaving them standing in the parking lot like actors who'd forgotten their lines. But I wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. The beautiful thing about managing commercial real estate is that you learn how small cities really work. You learn who owns what, who owes money to whom, and how the invisible networks of favor and obligation hold everything together. You also learn that information is the most valuable currency in a small town, and that timing is everything. Jake Morrison owned a small auto repair shop on the east side of town. It was a decent business, nothing spectacular, but steady enough to support his family and employ 3 mechanics. What most people didn't know was that Jake had been struggling with the rent for the past 2 years, ever since his landlord had jacked up the lease payment by 30%. I knew because Jake's landlord was one of my clients. Tom Bradley worked as a loan officer at First National Bank. He had a good reputation and had never been in any serious trouble, but he'd been cutting corners on documentation for the past year, approving loans for friends and family without proper verification. Nothing criminal, but definitely against bank policy. I knew because Tom had approved a loan for one of my tenants using income statements that I knew were inflated. Steve Walsh was a city councilman who'd been taking small gifts from contractors in exchange for favorable votes on zoning issues. Again, nothing that would land him in jail, but definitely enough to end his political career if it became public. I knew because I'd seen him at dinner with developers the night before crucial votes, and because I'd helped those same developers find warehouse space in exchange for casual conversations about their business practices. Lisa Morrison was a substitute teacher who'd been padding her hours and claiming pay for days she hadn't actually worked. The amounts were small, but the school district took timesheet fraud seriously. I knew because Lisa had bragged to Paula about her system during one of their girls' nights out, and Paula had mentioned it to me back when we still talked to each other. For 3 months, I sat on all of this information, waiting for the right moment. I'm a patient man, you have to be, in my business, and I wanted to make sure that when I moved, it would be decisive. The moment came in January, when I heard through the grapevine that Paula had finally given up on Evan and was planning to move back to her hometown in Ohio. She was telling people that she needed a fresh start, away from all the negative energy in our city. That's when I made my calls. I didn't call Jake's landlord directly. Instead, I mentioned to my client during a routine meeting that I'd heard Jake was having trouble making his payments on time. I suggested he might want to verify that the rent was current and consider whether Jake was a reliable long-term tenant. I didn't report Tom to his supervisor. Instead, I had a casual conversation with another loan officer at First National, mentioning that I'd been surprised by how quickly my tenant's loan had been approved given their shaky financial situation. I wondered aloud whether the bank's documentation standards had changed. I didn't file a complaint against Steve with the City Ethics Board. Instead, I mentioned to a reporter for the local newspaper that he might want to look into the voting patterns of city council members on zoning issues, particularly in relation to their social connections with developers. I didn't turn Lisa into the school district. Instead, I anonymously mailed them copies of her timesheets alongside the substitute teaching schedules that showed she'd claimed payment for days when she was actually out of town. Within 2 weeks, Jake had received notice that his lease wouldn't be renewed. Tom was under investigation by his bank's compliance department. Steve was facing questions from both the newspaper and the city attorney's office. Lisa had been suspended pending a review of her employment records. None of them knew I was involved. As far as they could tell, their problems were just bad luck, the kind of random misfortune that sometimes strikes when you've been careless for too long. But I wasn't finished. The last piece of my revenge wasn't about Jake, Tom, Steve, or Lisa. It was about Paula, and it was the most satisfying thing I've ever done in my life. Paula's plan to move to Ohio depended on getting a job there first. She'd been interviewing with pharmaceutical companies in Columbus and Cleveland, trying to rebuild her career far enough from New England that her reputation might not follow her. What she didn't know was that the pharmaceutical industry is smaller than it appears. People move between companies regularly, and hiring managers talk to each other more than most job seekers realize. It also didn't hurt that I'd made some connections over the years through my work. When you help medical device companies find warehouse space and pharmaceutical distributors locate office facilities, you get to know people throughout the industry. I didn't sabotage Paula's job search directly. I didn't have to. I simply made sure that the right people had access to the right information at the right time. When a hiring manager in Columbus called PharmaCorp for a reference, they got the full story about Paula's termination. When a company in Cleveland was considering her for a marketing position, someone mentioned that they might want to verify her expense account practices with her previous employer. Paula's job search stretched from weeks into months. Her savings ran out. Her unemployment benefits were denied because she'd been fired for cause. She was forced to take a part-time job at a retail store while continuing to interview for positions that never materialized. Meanwhile, Jake's auto shop closed after he couldn't find a new location he could afford. Tom was demoted at the bank and transferred to a branch in a smaller town an hour away. Steve withdrew from the city council race he'd been planning to run, citing personal reasons. Lisa was fired from the school district and was working as a cashier at a grocery store. I watched it all unfold with the same detached interest I might feel while reading about strangers in a newspaper. These people had chosen to make me their enemy based on lies and half-truths. They'd attacked my character and tried to turn my community against me without bothering to learn the facts. Now they were learning that actions have consequences and that some people are more dangerous when underestimated than when feared. The final blow came in March, 6 months after our confrontation in the Murphy's bar parking lot. Paula had finally found a job, not in pharmaceutical marketing, but as an administrative assistant at a small medical supply company in Akron. The pay was less than half what she'd been making at PharmaCorp, but it was enough to let her leave town and start over. She was scheduled to start on a Monday. On the Friday before, her new employer received an anonymous email containing links to news articles about PharmaCorp's internal investigation, copies of Paula's termination paperwork, and a detailed timeline of her relationship with Evan Cross. The job offer was rescinded that afternoon. Paula called me that night, sobbing and desperate. It was the first time we'd spoken since the divorce was finalized. "Henry, please," she begged. "I know you're behind this. I know you're destroying every opportunity I get. Please just let me go. Let me start over somewhere else." I listened to her cry for a full minute before responding. "Paula," I said, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather, "I want you to think very carefully about what you just accused me of. You're suggesting that I have the power and influence to manipulate hiring decisions at companies across multiple states. You're claiming that I'm so connected and so vindictive that I can destroy career opportunities for someone I've never even worked with. I know it's you. Do you? Or are you finally discovering that reputation matters and that the professional world is smaller than you thought?" She was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is," I continued, "I don't need to sabotage your job search. You did that yourself the day you decided to steal from your employer to fund an affair. Every door that's closed to you now, you closed yourself. Every opportunity you've lost, you lost through your own choices." "But you could help me," she whispered. "You could tell people that I've learned from my mistakes. You could give me a reference, or at least stop people from spreading stories about what happened." I almost laughed. "Paula, do you remember what you said to me the night Marina showed you those text messages? You said I never understood you, that I was too small and too boring to appreciate what you needed from life." I was upset. I didn't mean... "You meant every word, and you were right. I am small and boring. I manage strip mall leases and watch baseball on weekends. I drive an old Honda and buy my clothes at department stores. I'm exactly the kind of unremarkable man that someone like you would eventually find disappointing." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But here's what you never understood about small, boring men like me," I said. "We pay attention. We remember things. We understand how systems work and how people connect to each other. And when someone hurts us, we don't get mad and make a scene. We get patient. We get methodical. We get even." The line went quiet, except for the sound of her breathing. "Goodbye, Paula," I said. "Good luck in Ohio, or wherever you end up." I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Through my kitchen window, I could see the lights of the city where I'd lived my entire adult life, where I'd built a business and a reputation and a network of relationships that had served me well when I needed them. Paula was wrong about one thing. I wasn't destroying her future. I was simply making sure that her past followed her wherever she went, the way the past should follow all of us. She'd made choices, and now she was living with the consequences of those choices. As for Jake, Tom, Steve, and Lisa, they'd chosen to judge me without knowing the facts, to attack me without understanding the situation, to make me their enemy without considering what kind of enemy I might turn out to be. Now they knew. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the empty kitchen, to the quiet house that was finally truly mine, and to the lesson that had taken me 46 years to learn. That sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being more patient, more careful, and more ruthless than the people who underestimate you.